Sunwheelmagic.com, thunderwizard.com. So if you're at all familiar with any of my work, you've heard me use the term imperialism. So today I want to talk to you about what I mean by that word. And I want to talk to you about imperialism and the birth of the intellect, and how this process created a fundamental shift in human thinking that disconnected him from his environment to the degree that we now end up in the state where we have now, where we have global warming, which is working very hard to destroy the world. We've got economic inequality, we've got religious persecution, we've got racial persecution, we have religious wars. All this stuff is a result of the adoption of the imperial mindset, which fundamentally shifted human beings out of their animist mindset. And if you look at every culture in the world, they can trace their origins back to some form of animism, or what is more commonly called shamanism. That's actually incorrect. 99.99% of the time when somebody uses the word shamanism, what they really mean is animism. So let's get reacquainted with what animism is. Animism was the belief of all human beings, and it was a belief system that actually came about as a result of evolution. It was a belief system that allowed human beings to survive the best for those people who lived in direct contact with the elements, with their immediate environment. And animism is simply the belief that all things in the universe, rocks, trees, plants, animals, weather patterns, all of these things have consciousness, and that human beings, in order to survive, must achieve a dynamic balance with all of these forces around them. And it was the animist priest, the wizard, the shaman, the medicine man, whatever word you want to use. The animist priest was responsible for acting as an intermediary between the human world and all of the other realms and energies around them. And so this dynamic balance allowed people to live. It was the shaman that allowed people to know where the games of herds were going to be. It was the priest, the animist priest, who knew how to deal with sickness and illness. And the point I'm trying to make is that this belief system was born out of a practical need for survival. It was not arbitrary. And so I'm saying that the birth of the intellect that came about as the result of the imperial mindset is a mindset of arbitrariness. Just to give you an example, philosophers love to get trapped in all kinds of intellectual arbitrary arguments that have absolutely no connection to their immediate physical survival. If you can sit around and talk about and debate on the nature of mankind, or some other deep philosophical concept that has no effect on whether or not you're going to get the resources to live tomorrow, that's what I mean by arbitrary. And I'm saying that animism was not arbitrary in any way. So let's talk about how this happened. How does this shift happen? Well, it started with the birth of empires, which happened 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and has taken about this time, about 3,000 to 4,000 years to completely dominate the globe. This is the first century, the 21st century, where we really have no place in the world that is not dominated on some level by some kind of empire or empirical mindset. I think there's, to our knowledge, there's probably only a few tribes left in the Amazon that have not had direct contact with modern man. But what happens to create an empire is this. You've got a population of people, a village, whatever it is, and this village becomes a town. And so they all live packed in one little area. And so there's now more people than can be effectively fed and clothed from their immediate environment. And so they do things like, first they start farming. So they start farming grain is usually one of the first ones. And then they have all this surplus of grain, so they have to hold the grain somewhere. So they create silos or huts or buildings to hold all the grain. And then the outlying populations start to go, hey, those people over there, they got tons of grain, they got a heck of a lot more than they need. So then the people that have all the grain need to protect it from other people. So they create armies to protect the grain. Then because they have a surplus of food, there's a population explosion. And then they really don't have enough resources to supply the people within that community. So they expand out further and they start a military campaign. And they start conquering the outlying areas around them. And then they start using those people as resources, and we call them slaves. They use those people as resources, and they use all of the natural resources around them to allow all those people who live in this secluded tiny area in order to survive. In order for people to do that, they now are no longer in a state of dynamic balance with their neighbors, with their surrounding people around them. Now other people are seen as enemies. And so in order to enslave people, you have to have some justification for it. This is the birth of the intellect. The intellect, as I'm calling it, is this arbitrary mindset that gives arbitrary justifications for people to live out of balance in an unnatural way. At that point you have the birth of some kind of superior mindset where either they're religiously superior, they're morally superior, their society is superior. The Roman Empire was built on this feeling of superiority. This is where we get the word barbarians. Barbarians meant, another culture that was less evolved, and of course they were superior to that. But this is where it happened, and this started, for the Western civilization, this started in classical Greece. And no matter where somebody is in Western civilization, whether it be England or Scandinavia or Russia, or especially here in the United States, because the United States takes a lot of pride in their democratic form of government, we look back to the birth of democracy. And even though our ancestors at the time of classical Greece were living a tribal animist lifestyle, we still in the West are taught in schools that we came from the Greeks. There isn't the understanding that that was a completely different society than ours. We have adopted our history and our mythology to the Greeks. And the Greeks, of course, this spilled over into the Romans, and there you have it. But each successive empire seems to do much better than the one before it. And so this has brought about our arbitrary, intellectual, imperial mindset where we can continue to seek ways to stay separated from our immediate environment. And so this is what I'm talking about. When I say the imperial mindset, this is what I mean. And this fundamental shift in human thinking is actually overturning tens of thousands of years of evolution. And so now we've gotten to the point where we're not in dynamic balance with our relationship, we're actually destroying it. And this mindset of desacralizing nature is where this comes from. In order to dominate nature, you must first desacralize it. And so this came about with Christianity, and this is why with Christianity you have this hatred of earth, and this idea that there is the spiritual world and the physical world is bad and evil, and the spiritual world is good. And so that's why today, even the majority of fundamentalist Christians have no problem destroying the environment. In fact, they talk about derision towards those environmentalists and those tree huggers, as though there's something evil or wrong about wanting to preserve your natural environment. I mean, think about it. That's insane. I mean, just for a moment, think about it. That's an insane thought. Destroying your natural environment is spiritual, and preserving it is evil. This has come about as the direct result of the imperial mindset. So there's probably a lot more things that I could talk about here, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.